Welcome to the second installment of the Dolphin Insider. I am Patrick Wilkins alongside Scott Manze, and the JU Dolphins come in to Marist in Poughkeepsie, New York, and finally get a monkey off their back, beating Marist for the first time in 3 tries in a very sloppy, very ugly football game that included 11 turnovers and 30 penalties. I don't understand where we were able to pull out a win in that game. Obviously, 6 turnovers by the Red Foxes is something that we can always take advantage of. But Scott, go ahead and tell me a little bit about the struggles that the Dolphins were having in upstate New York.
It was one of those games where it seemed like from the get-go things were going to be a little sloppy. Noon kickoff after a long day's worth of travel the day before. You have to bus an hour from the hotel we stayed at to get to the field. It's a noon kickoff, so it's an early game. Both teams went 3 and out to start, and then it looked like JU was going to start putting something together, put together a drive, drove all the way down the field, but did something that they hadn't done all year, actually stalled out in the red zone, and that is something that ended up being a problem throughout the course of the game, not being able to punch it in when they got close, especially in the first half. Second half, they were able to rectify that for a couple of touchdowns, but it was, some missed field goals, a lot of penalties, and some untimely turnovers almost cost JU in this one.
We went into this game thinking that, or at least I did, that maybe the Dolphins were going to try and create that run presence that we've been known for. We're definitely a pass-happy team. I didn't expect us to be 63 pass attempts pass-happy.
Well, part of that is there were a ton of plays run. I mean, back and forth. This was a long game in between penalties and turnovers. The offenses both had the ball a lot, it seemed, and the clock wasn't running much of the time, so that meant greater chances for plays to be run. And so that's why there was a decent amount of runs in this game. I mean, Ulysses Bryant looked as best as he has all season long. The team rushing total really takes a hit because of the fact of the safety that Ryan Giarratano had to kick out of the back of the end zone. Well, that's minus 24 yards rushing right there. So that hurt a team performance that went well over 100 yards for the first time this year. And between the two-headed monster of both Ulysses Bryant and the sophomore Jamal Adjama, they were able to get things going, especially with the delayed rushing game. And even Cade Bell was able to chip in a few on the ground, diving for some first downs, and he scored the first Dolphin rushing touchdown of the year on a 1-yard keeper around the left end in the third quarter.
Ulysses Bryant did have 16 carries for 89 yards, the closest he's come to the century mark all season. You feel like he's on the brink of having that breakout game.
Oh, yeah.
A game that we've got this Saturday. Our first home game will be this Saturday at 1 o'clock against Morehead State. They're coming down from Kentucky. But you feel like Ulysses Bryant is on the brink of a breakout. Is this the week that we see 20-plus carries and maybe a couple touchdowns from Uli?
Well, he had his best games at home last year, Patrick. I mean, he went off against teams such as Campbell, such as Drake, such as Penn. I mean, he went over 100 yards in all those games last year, and so you expect that in the friendly confines and the turf of DB Milne Field, looking 100% like he did last week for the first time all year, with the team as a whole feeling more comfortable against a defensive front that is good at getting pass pressure, but I don't know how well they stand up against the run. They're very middle of the pack there and haven't played against a team that features backs among the likes of Bryan and Adjama. So I would expect the running game to finally have that, at least one of those guys hit the century mark, and you're talking well over 150 yards rushing on the ball game.
3 fumbles in the ball game against Marist. Definitely not the best performance put forth. Adjama has one. Cade Bell has one down at the 1-yard line, which stalls a drive for us. Could have led to a touchdown and really put the game away. What are some of the things that you think Kerwin Bell is going to be working on with his running backs to try and prevent these turnovers and these costly turnovers that are at inopportune times for the Dolphins?
It's mental. It's all mental. I mean, the physical ability is there. If you look at the total yardage, Dolphins well over 400 yards of total offense on the game. They were able to move the football, and that was very evident. And there were a handful of times that they had the ball down deep in the Marist end of the field and came away with no points. I mean, I can think of Brian Burnett, the wide receiver. He's trying to make a man miss and ends up fumbling on the far side. Damian Strange got called for a fumble on what was a very it looked like he was down from my vantage point. I was a little far away, but it seemed like the ball came out late, but nonetheless a fumble, and then a miscommunication on the goal line and a low snap that gets away from Cade Bell, and they end up falling on, Marist ends up falling on and recovering it. So it's mental issues right now, and those are things that a lot of times you deal with more on the road than at home. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here today, Patrick, but a lot of the issues we've seen, we should see corrected just by the sheer fact of being the home team, being comfortable, not having to worry about some of the adverse conditions that you experience on the road.
Coming home is definitely a comforting feeling for a football team that has, done enough to get 3 wins for the first time since 2001, but still shows a lot of holes, a lot of inconsistencies, and a lot of lack of discipline, in my opinion. 20 penalties for 183 yards is not going to get it done. Where does Kerwin Bell take the team here to get their heads in the game and to prevent them from making those same mental mistakes?
Well, the penalties are a thing that has sort of existed for many years under Coach Bell. I mean, they were repeatedly one of the more penalized teams in the Pioneer Football League, and part of that, there's a lot of different factors. I won't sit here and blame anything in particular, but I think a lot of different things add up to that involve things you can control and things you can't control here at JU. So I think it's a matter of getting these guys into what is going to be a 3-week rhythm. 3 straight games at home, so you're able to practice until the walkthrough on Thursday. They'll do a movie night on Friday, keep the guys in control. You don't have to worry about the long travel, things like that. If you're not weary physically, sometimes travel can do that to you, especially
Absolutely.
some of these longer trips, and that's going to keep you sharper mentally. And in a situation in which some of these guys might be a little amped up for their first home game, that's the ones that Kerwin has to kind of keep an eye on. Some of these younger players that are getting the opportunity to play at home in front of what should be a great crowd at DB Milne on Saturday for the first time.
I expect a big crowd. All Dolphin faithful should be there with bells on because it is the first of 3 home games that we have here. And it'd be great to bring a win home, first game at home, leading into the homecoming week next week. You mentioned before we came on air that Cade Bell had a little bit of an incident at the Newberry game that deadened his arm, but yet he goes out and throws 63 passes. Do you see that scaling back at all against a Morehead State this Saturday?
If I knew, I'd have a crystal ball, Patrick. It's one of those, I don't think anybody anticipated Cade throwing the ball 63 times against Marist, especially dealing with a bit of a shoulder issue that he'd suffered in the game against Newberry, in which he was throwing the football, the defender came in, kind of took the ball out of his arm, and when you have torque going one way and it's met with torque going the other way, nothing good comes out of that. So he's a gamer. Cade Bell is as tough a guy that has come and played here at JU in the history of this program, and he goes out there and slings it all over the place. We asked him after the game how his arm felt. He said, tired. And that would be a very honest assessment and a diplomatic way to put it at that. Like we said before, that running game gets going. This was a unique situation in which there were just, like I said, a lot of plays were run. I don't foresee this many plays being run, but that being said, here's 2 of the more prolific offenses in the PFL coming to meet each other this weekend with Morehead State coming into town, so we could see a repeat performance. I'm sure Cade's arm's hoping that it's not that case.
I'm hoping just for his arm's sake that he's able to scale those throws back. I really hope that we're able to develop the run with Ulysses Bryant and really allow him to hit the century mark, maybe hit pay dirt a couple of times. Morehead State has yet to allow a point in the last 2 weeks. They start the season 0-2, have won weeks 3 and 4 without allowing a point in those 2 contests, What are the Dolphins going to have to do to really contain that offense of Morehead State?
Well, they're coming off a 34-0 win in their PFL opener against Davidson, Morehead State is, and Davidson's certainly one of the lower-tier teams in the PFL, but nonetheless, it's impressive. Their quarterback is a junior now, Austin Gehafer, who the Dolphins faced last year, is just a sophomore who showed some flashes, but wasn't quite ready for the defensive effort that JU threw at him. And that's going to be the key again today. One thing that you can't argue is that the Jacksonville defense has been phenomenal this year. I mean, You got 7 interceptions on the season, including 4 of those coming this past week. They didn't have an interception in the first game of the year. That's 5th nationally and actually tied with Morehead State for 2nd in the Pioneer Football League. They forced 12 turnovers. That ranks 4th nationally, and allowing only red zone touchdowns only 30% of the time. That's best in the country. I mean, this defense knows when it needs to raise its game. With its backs against the wall, it does a tremendous job. It holds teams to field goal attempts. It forces turnovers. It does not allow touchdowns to be scored. And for a team like Morehead State that has done such a great job of scoring points this year, thanks to the junior leader, Gehafer, who has 1,075 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, completing 57% of his passes in those 4 games already. He's the only PFL quarterback to have thrown for over 1,000 yards already this season. So it's going to be a challenge, but I certainly don't think it's one that the defense isn't ready to rise the occasion for. One thing to watch out for, Terrence Bryant, starting free safety, who was named College Sports Madness PFL Defensive Player of the Week for his performance against Marist, career-high 15 tackles and an INT. He was ejected in the 4th quarter for targeting against Marist.
Right.
That means he's going to have to sit out the first half of the game against Morehead State on Saturday. JU is appealing to the PFL to see if they can get that overturned. I've seen the tape, though. I'll be honest. It's not a dirty hit, but he did leave his feet, so I can see that this would be a situation in which that targeting call is not overturned.
A lot of times, as we know, the appeals never really go through. It's tough to win an appeal and overturn a suspension, so I don't expect to see Terrence Bryant out there the first half. You mentioned Morehead State being a pass-happy team, already over 1,000 yards passing through 4 games. I think that bodes really well for our secondary that, as you said, has 7 interceptions. Led the country just last year in interceptions as well, and they look to be taking off exactly where they left off from last year in 2014. I expect to see a great performance from our secondary and really forcing Morehead State on their heels, and which is going to lead to more pass attempts and more opportunities for our secondary to be effective.
And the secondary gets all the credit because when you think interceptions, you think secondary, but you have to give credit to the linebacking core as well. DJ Howard leads this team in interceptions as a linebacker with 2. You also have Josh Sellerin, who's a former safety that plays one of the linebacker spots now. He had a couple pass breakups in the game against Marist because he's following receivers all over the field. It's unbelievable. And then the defensive line, which can get in there and create havoc. I mean, there were a handful of coverage sacks against Marist, against a mobile quarterback and Michael White, because the secondary and the linebackers did their job, and the defensive front is able to get that push. I mean, you talk about T.J. Jenkins, who's had a great start to his senior campaign. Trey Davis coming back from injury has been great. Morale White, there are others that I'm not naming, but they've been tremendous. And this is a Morehead team that protects reasonably well. Gehafer doesn't move the way that some of the other quarterbacks that JU has played this year, so he will be back there. A Dolphin defense that likes to get after the quarterback should be sitting there licking their chops coming in this matchup.
What kind of prediction do you have for this week?
This is one where I think if it isn't a big win, that's when JU fans can start to get a little worried about the rest of the season. But I think at home, things shake themselves out. This Dolphin defense is able to rise the occasion. The offense is able to put a game out of reach sometime in the second half. I see something along the lines of 42-17, JU wins.
That's a lot of points put up by the Dolphins. I hope he's right. I don't think that our offense is quite there yet. We've got to try and find our identity on offense, which I still don't think we have done so yet. I do like the comfortable confines of coming home of DB Milne Field, where we've played so well under Kerwin Bell. I like to see Ulysses Bryant get involved. You know, Cade Bell has had issues with his arm in the recent weeks, coming off a 63 pass attempt, performance against Marist. I like to see him scale back just a little bit and let's ramp up the rushing game, see if we can't get between the tackles, maybe a couple of rushing scores, second, third of the season for the Dolphins. I'm looking at maybe a 28-20 victory for the Dolphins over Morehead State, but really, silencing a lot of critics that we've had thus far and really prepping ourselves for a Drake team that's very good. And for a homecoming crowd, the first night game that we'll have at DB Milne Field the following Saturday. So I look for us to really find our identity on offense, continue to pressure the ball, the quarterback on defense, and come away with a 28-20 victory. The game is at 1 o'clock on Saturday. You
On
can
the call
watch
kickoff.
You can watch it on the Watch ESPN app, or you can tune into 92.5 FM or 1010 AM here in Jacksonville in the local market. Scott Manze will be on the call. I'll be on the sidelines. So be sure to tune in and watch the Dolphins this Saturday. For Scott Manze, I am Patrick Wilkins. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Dolphin Insider.